The scorching sun beat down mercilessly on the Navy training facility in Coronado, California. Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her brow as she adjusted her tactical gear one final time. At 24 years old, she stood barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, but her eyes burned with a determination that had carried her through 2 years of grueling preparation for this moment. The obstacle course stretched out before her like a metal and concrete beast designed to break spirits and shatter dreams. For the past 6 months, Sarah had been the only woman among 267 elite Navy SEALs participating in an experimental cross-training program. The military brass wanted to test new combat techniques, and Sarah, a former Marine turned private contractor, had somehow earned her spot through a series of qualifying tests that had eliminated hundreds of other candidates. The men around her weren't just any soldiers. These were the cream of the crop, warriors who had survived Hell Week, completed countless missions in hostile territories, and earned their place among the most feared special operations forces in the world. Each one of them had initially viewed Sarah's presence as either a publicity stunt or a social experiment doomed to fail. Master Chief Petty Officer Jake "Razor" Thompson stood at the edge of the course, his weathered face showing no emotion as he watched the participants prepare. At 42, he had seen more combat than most people could imagine, and he had trained thousands of SEALs over his 20-year career. When he first heard that a woman would be joining their elite group for this exercise, he had simply shrugged. Results spoke louder than gender in his world. The whispers started early that morning as Sarah checked her equipment. Some of the SEALs exchanged glances and made quiet comments about whether she would make it past the first obstacle. Others remained silent, adopting a wait-and-see attitude. A few, however, seemed to take her presence as a personal insult to their brotherhood. Lieutenant Commander Derek Walsh was the most vocal of Sarah's critics. A decorated SEAL with multiple deployments under his belt, he had made no secret of his belief that women had no place in special operations. During the morning briefing, he had deliberately spoken over Sarah when she asked a technical question about the course layout. His attitude had infected a small group of his followers, creating an undercurrent of hostility that Sarah could feel like electricity in the air. As the participants lined up at the starting position, Sarah found herself positioned between 2 massive SEALs who towered over her by more than a foot. The man to her left, Petty Officer First Class Mike "Tank" Rodriguez, gave her a slight nod of acknowledgement. He had served alongside female Marines in Afghanistan and had learned to respect anyone who earned their way into combat, regardless of gender. The man to her right, however, remained stone-faced and avoided eye contact entirely. The course itself was a nightmare of physical and mental challenges designed to push even elite operators to their breaking point. It began with a 100-yard low crawl under razor wire, followed by a series of rope climbs, wall scaling, tire flips, and precision shooting stations. The final obstacle was a simulation of urban combat, requiring participants to navigate through a mock building while engaging targets and rescuing a hostage mannequin. What made this particular exercise unique was its competitive nature. Unlike traditional training, where everyone worked toward completion, this course ranked participants based on overall time and accuracy. The results would be used to evaluate new training methods and potentially influence future SEAL selection criteria. For Sarah, it represented something much more personal, a chance to prove that her 2 years of preparation and sacrifice had been worth it. Master Chief Thompson raised his hand to signal the start. The desert wind picked up slightly, carrying with it the smell of dust and diesel fuel from nearby vehicles. Sarah felt her heart rate slow as she entered the zone of focused calm that had served her well during her Marine deployments in Iraq. She had learned long ago that physical strength alone wouldn't carry her through challenges like this. Mental toughness, tactical intelligence, and the ability to push through pain when others quit would be her greatest weapons. The countdown began, and Sarah noticed several of the SEALs stealing glances at her. Some looked curious, others skeptical, and a few appeared openly hostile. She had faced similar attitudes throughout her military career, but never in such a concentrated environment where failure would be witnessed by so many elite operators. The weight of representation pressed down on her shoulders. She wasn't just competing for herself. She was competing for every woman who might follow in her footsteps. As Master Chief Thompson's hand dropped, and the word "go" echoed across the training ground, Sarah exploded forward with the rest of the group. The low crawl under razor wire was brutal, with rocks and sand grinding against her uniform as she pulled herself forward with her elbows and knees. Her smaller stature actually worked to her advantage here, allowing her to stay lower than the larger men around her. But this was just the beginning, and Sarah knew that the real test would come when fatigue set in and the obstacles grew more demanding 20 minutes into the course. Sarah was holding her own in the middle of the pack. Sweat poured down her face as she approached the rope climbing station, her forearms burning from the previous obstacles. Several SEALs had already completed this section and moved on, while others struggled with the 30-foot vertical ascent that awaited her. The rope climb had always been one of Sarah's weaker areas during training. Her lighter body weight should have been an advantage, but many of the SEALs possessed upper body strength that she simply couldn't match. As she grabbed the thick manila rope and began her ascent, she could hear Lieutenant Commander Walsh's voice cutting through the morning air. "Look at her technique," Walsh said loudly enough for several nearby operators to hear. "She's using her legs too much. Won't have anything left for the final push." His comment was technically accurate, but delivered with enough disdain to make his real message clear. Sarah gritted her teeth and focused on her climbing rhythm. One hand over the other, legs wrapped around the rope for support, breathing controlled despite the burning in her lungs. Halfway up, she glanced down and saw Walsh watching her with his arms crossed, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. The sight sparked something fierce inside her, and she attacked the remaining 15 feet with renewed intensity. When she rang the bell at the top and began her controlled descent, she had shaved precious seconds off her personal best time. Tank Rodriguez, who was preparing for his own climb, gave her an approving nod as she hit the ground. "Solid work," he said quietly. "Walsh can kiss my ass." The next series of obstacles tested agility and precision rather than raw strength. Sarah navigated the balance beams and tire course with the fluid grace of someone who had spent countless hours perfecting her technique. Her background in martial arts, developed during her teenage years, served her well as she maintained her position among the group's middle tier. It was at the wall scaling section that the first real confrontation occurred. The 12-foot wooden barrier required participants to either boost each other up or find a way to scale it individually. Military protocol and common sense dictated that team members should assist each other, but when Sarah approached the wall, she found herself suddenly isolated. Walsh had positioned himself as an informal leader of his section, directing other SEALs to pair up for mutual assistance. When Sarah looked for a partner, she discovered that Walsh had somehow arranged things so that every available teammate was already committed to helping someone else. The message was clear. She was on her own. Standing before the imposing wall, Sarah felt the eyes of dozens of elite operators on her. Some watched with genuine curiosity to see how she would handle the situation, while others seemed to be enjoying her predicament. In the distance, she could see Master Chief Thompson observing, but not intervening. This was exactly the kind of challenge that would reveal character under pressure. Sarah stepped back and studied the wall for several long seconds. The wood was weathered but solid, with few handholds and a smooth surface designed to be challenging even for the most athletic individuals. She noticed a small imperfection in the wood grain about 8 feet up, barely visible, but enough to potentially provide a fingerhold if she could reach it. Taking a deep breath, Sarah sprinted toward the wall and launched herself upward. Her right foot hit the wood at about the 5-foot mark, and she used the momentum to push higher while her hands searched for any kind of grip. Her fingertips found the tiny imperfection she had spotted, and she hung there for a moment, her entire body weight supported by the strength in her fingers and forearms. The training ground fell silent except for the sound of wind and distant voices from other parts of the course. Every SEAL in the immediate area had stopped what they were doing to watch. Sarah's muscles screamed in protest as she fought to maintain her grip on the inadequate handhold. For a moment, it looked like she might fall and be forced to either seek help or forfeit the obstacle entirely. Instead, Sarah did something that surprised everyone watching. She began to swing her legs back and forth, building momentum like a gymnast preparing for a major move. On the third swing, she released her handhold and used the momentum to grab the top edge of the wall with both hands. The sudden transition from a failing position to a successful grip happened so quickly that several SEALs actually stepped closer to make sure they had seen it correctly. Sarah pulled herself up and over the wall with smooth efficiency, landing on the other side in a perfect combat roll that dispersed the impact across her body. As she stood and dusted herself off, she could hear a few appreciative whistles from some of the operators who had witnessed her improvised solution. Walsh's reaction was less enthusiastic. "Show off," he muttered to one of his nearby teammates. "Let's see how she handles the real challenges." The real challenges Walsh referred to were still ahead, and Sarah knew that her performance so far had only earned her the right to face even more difficult tests. The precision shooting stations required not just marksmanship skills, but the ability to maintain accuracy while physically and mentally exhausted. The urban combat simulation would test everything she had learned about tactics, teamwork, and decision-making under pressure. As she jogged toward the next obstacle, Sarah caught sight of Master Chief Thompson making notes on his clipboard. His expression remained neutral, but she thought she detected a slight nod of approval. Whether that was real or wishful thinking on her part, she couldn't be sure. What Sarah didn't know was that her unconventional solution to the wall obstacle had impressed more people than she realized. Several SEALs who had been skeptical about her presence were beginning to reassess their opinions. Tank Rodriguez wasn't the only one who had started to respect her determination and problem-solving abilities. But Walsh's hostility was also growing stronger. In his mind, every success Sarah achieved was a challenge to the natural order of things, and he was determined to find a way to expose what he saw as the inevitable limits of her capabilities. The real confrontation was still ahead, and when it came, it would test more than just physical ability. The precision shooting stations pushed Sarah to her absolute limits. Her hands trembled slightly from exhaustion as she approached the firing line, her heart rate elevated from the previous obstacles. Around her, elite marksmen who had honed their skills in countless combat situations prepared their weapons with casual confidence. Sarah's military background included extensive firearms training, but she knew she was facing some of the best shooters in the world. The course required participants to engage targets at varying distances while navigating physical obstacles and time constraints. Each missed shot would add penalty time to their overall score, making accuracy just as important as speed. The first shooting position required prone firing at targets 300 yards away. Sarah settled into her stance, feeling the familiar weight of the rifle against her shoulder. As she controlled her breathing and found her natural respiratory pause, the chaos of the training ground seemed to fade away. This was a skill that transcended physical strength, relying instead on mental discipline and technique. Her first 3 shots were perfect center mass hits. The 4th shot caught the edge of the target ring, still a valid hit but not optimal. As she transitioned to the next firing position, she could hear Walsh's voice behind her. "Lucky shots," he said to his nearby teammate, deliberately loud enough for Sarah to hear. "Wait until the stress really kicks in." The next station required rapid engagement of multiple targets while moving between covered positions. This simulation replicated the kind of combat shooting that SEALs might encounter during actual operations. Sarah moved fluidly from cover to cover, engaging each target with controlled pairs of shots before advancing to the next position. Her performance here was solid, but not exceptional. Several SEALs completed the course with faster times and higher accuracy scores. Sarah finished in the upper middle of the group, a respectable showing that kept her competitive but didn't silence her critics. The final shooting challenge was the most demanding. Precision shots while physically stressed. Participants had to complete a series of burpees, mountain climbers, and sprints before immediately engaging distant targets. The exercise was designed to simulate the reality of combat, where soldiers rarely had the luxury of shooting from a rested position. After completing the physical stress portion, Sarah's heart was pounding and her hands were shaking from exertion. She had 30 seconds to stabilize her position and engage 5 targets at 400 yards. Most of the SEALs had managed 3 to 4 hits under these conditions, with a few exceptional marksmen achieving perfect scores. Sarah forced herself to slow down her breathing despite the time pressure. She could feel sweat dripping into her eyes as she acquired her first target through the rifle scope. The crosshairs wavered slightly, but she waited for the natural pause in her breathing and squeezed the trigger with steady pressure. Hit! The first target dropped cleanly. Second target acquired, sight picture verified, breathing controlled, trigger squeeze. Another hit. By the fourth target, Sarah had found her rhythm despite the physical stress. The fifth and final shot was the most challenging, requiring a slight elevation adjustment for a target position higher than the others. She made the adjustment instinctively, based on countless hours of practice, and sent her final round downrange. 5 hits out of 5 shots. A perfect score under stress conditions that had challenged even veteran SEALs. The range safety officer confirmed her score over the loudspeaker, and several nearby operators turned to look at her with newfound respect. Tank Rodriguez slapped her on the shoulder with a grin. "That's how you shoot, Marine," he said approvingly. Walsh's reaction was notably different. Rather than acknowledging her achievement, he found fault with her technique. She took too long on the setup, he complained to anyone who would listen. In real combat, hesitation kills. His criticism wasn't entirely wrong, but it ignored the fact that Sarah's methodical approach had produced better results than his own rapid-fire attempt, which had yielded only 3 hits. Several experienced SEALs noticed this inconsistency in Walsh's assessment, and his credibility began to suffer among some of his peers. Master Chief Thompson had been watching the entire shooting evolution with particular interest. In his 2 decades of training special operations personnel, he had developed an eye for natural ability versus manufactured competence. Sarah's performance suggested someone with genuine skill rather than someone who had simply memorized techniques. As the group prepared for the final phase of the course, the urban combat simulation, tensions were running higher than they had all day. The shooting stations had scrambled the rankings significantly, with some early leaders falling behind and others moving up dramatically. Sarah now found herself in the top quarter of participants, a position that had surprised even her. The urban combat simulation was housed in a specially constructed building designed to replicate the kind of close-quarters battle environments that SEALs encountered in real operations. The scenario was straightforward. Teams of 4 operators had to clear the building room by room, eliminate hostile targets, and rescue a hostage from the top floor. The exercise would be judged on time, accuracy, tactical soundness, and teamwork. This was where Walsh saw his opportunity to definitively prove his point about Sarah's limitations. As the informal leader of his group, he had significant influence over team compositions. When Master Chief Thompson called for participants to form teams of 4, Walsh quickly moved to ensure that Sarah ended up in his group. His logic was simple. If Sarah failed in a team environment under his leadership, it would demonstrate that she couldn't function effectively in the kind of unit cohesion that special operations demanded. If she succeeded, he could claim credit for managing her properly. Either way, he positioned himself to control the narrative. Sarah found herself teamed with Walsh, Tank Rodriguez, and Petty Officer Second Class Tommy Ghost Patterson, a quiet demolitions expert with extensive urban combat experience. Tank gave her an encouraging nod, while Ghost simply nodded professionally. Walsh outlined his tactical plan with military precision, but Sarah noticed that he assigned her to the least critical position in the formation. Martinez, you take rear security, Walsh commanded. Rodriguez and Patterson will be primary entry. I'll handle command and control from the middle position. Your job is to watch our backs and stay out of the way unless we specifically call for you. The assignment was tactically sound but clearly designed to minimize Sarah's impact on the team's performance. Rear security was important, but it wouldn't allow her to demonstrate the kind of aggressive problem-solving that had characterized her performance throughout the rest of the course. As they prepared to enter the building, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. Instead of accepting the limited role Walsh had assigned her, she was going to look for opportunities to contribute more meaningfully to the team's success, even if it meant taking initiative that Walsh hadn't authorized. The urban combat simulation began with Tank and Ghost moving through the first-floor entry point, while Walsh coordinated from behind them. Sarah maintained her assigned position at the rear, scanning for potential threats from behind and monitoring the team's overall tactical situation. The building's layout was designed to challenge even experienced operators, with multiple rooms, varying levels of lighting, and pop-up targets that could appear without warning. The first two rooms were cleared efficiently, with Tank and Ghost demonstrating the kind of fluid teamwork that came from years of training and combat experience. Walsh's commands were clear and appropriate, and Sarah began to wonder if she had misjudged his tactical abilities despite his obvious personal animosity toward her. Everything changed on the third room. As Tank prepared to enter what appeared to be a standard office space, Sarah noticed something that the others had missed. Her position at the rear gave her a different perspective on the room's layout, and she could see what looked like a wire running along the baseboard near the doorframe. Her demolitions training during her Marine service had taught her to recognize potential booby trap indicators. Tank, hold position, Sarah called out urgently. Possible wire by the door. Walsh spun around with fury in his eyes. Martinez, you do not call commands in my unit. Stay in your lane. But Tank had already stopped and was examining the area Sarah had indicated. His experienced eye quickly confirmed her observation. She's right, boss. There's definitely something here. Ghost, take a look. Ghost moved forward with the careful precision of someone who had disarmed countless explosive devices. After a few seconds of examination, he looked up with respect in his eyes. Good catch, Martinez. This would have triggered a simulated explosion that would have failed the entire team. The discovery should have been a moment of team success, but Walsh's reaction transformed it into something entirely different. Instead of acknowledging Sarah's contribution, he seemed to view it as a personal humiliation. His jaw tightened as he processed the fact that she had spotted something that he had missed. Just stay focused on your assigned sector, Walsh said coldly. We don't need any more freelancing. The team continued through the building, but the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Tank and Ghost had both witnessed Walsh's inappropriate response to Sarah's legitimate tactical observation, and their respect for his leadership began to erode. More importantly, they started paying closer attention to Sarah's capabilities rather than simply accepting Walsh's assessment of her limitations. As they approached the stairwell leading to the second floor, the scenario became more complex. Intelligence reports indicated that the hostage was being held in one of 3 possible rooms on the upper level, and the team would need to move quickly to prevent the simulated execution of their target. The stairwell was narrow and provided limited options for tactical movement. Standard procedure called for a methodical clearing pattern, but the time constraints of the scenario demanded a more aggressive approach. Walsh's plan was sound, but conservative, likely to result in a successful mission with an average time score. Sarah could see a potential alternative that might save crucial seconds, but speaking up would require directly challenging Walsh's authority in front of the other team members. Her Marine training emphasized the importance of unit cohesion and following the chain of command, but it also taught her that tactical excellence sometimes required junior personnel to provide input that senior leaders might miss. Sir, Sarah said carefully, what if we split into 2 elements for the upper floor? We could clear 2 rooms simultaneously and cut our search time in half. Walsh's face darkened. Negative. We stay together and follow standard protocol. I'm not interested in your suggestions, Martinez. But Tank had been thinking along similar lines. Actually, sir, Martinez has a point. Ghost, and I could take the East Corridor while you and Martinez handle West. We got radio contact, and it would definitely speed up the operation. Walsh found himself in an impossible position. Rejecting the tactical modification would look like poor leadership, especially since Tank, one of his most experienced team members, had endorsed it. But accepting it would mean validating Sarah's tactical thinking, something he was psychologically unwilling to do. Fine, Walsh said through gritted teeth. But Martinez stays with me, where I can keep an eye on her. The modified plan worked flawlessly. Tank and Ghost cleared their assigned rooms with typical efficiency while Walsh and Sarah moved through the Western Corridor. The hostage was located in the final room of Sarah's section, and she was the first to identify and engage the hostile targets protecting the simulated victim. Her shooting was precise and rapid, neutralizing 2 targets before Walsh had fully processed the tactical situation. When the scenario ended with a successful hostage rescue, their team had achieved one of the fastest completion times of the day. But instead of celebration, Walsh's anger had reached a boiling point. As they exited the simulation building, he finally lost control of his emotions and the professional facade he had been maintaining throughout the exercise. You think you're hot shit, don't you, Martinez? Walsh snarled as soon as they were out of earshot of Master Chief Thompson. You think you can come in here and show up operators who have been doing this since before you ever thought about joining the military? Tank and Ghost stopped walking and turned to watch the confrontation unfold. Around them, other SEALs began to notice the heated exchange and moved closer to observe. I think I'm here to do my job, sir, Sarah replied evenly. Same as everyone else. Your job. Walsh's voice was rising now, attracting attention from across the training ground. Your job is to stay out of the way and let real operators handle real operations. You're nothing but a diversity hire, a political statement that puts everyone else at risk. The accusation hit Sarah like a physical blow. After everything she had accomplished during the course, after proving her skills at every station, Walsh was reducing her presence to nothing more than politics and quotas. The unfairness of it sparked something fierce and defensive in her chest. I earned my place here the same way everyone else did, Sarah said, her own voice growing stronger. Through qualification scores, physical fitness tests, and demonstrated competence. My performance today speaks for itself. Your performance? Walsh laughed harshly. You got lucky a few times, and think that makes you equal to operators who have bled for this brotherhood. Let me tell you something, Princess. When the real shooting starts, when lives are actually on the line, you'll fold like every other woman who thought she could play soldier. The word princess was the final straw that broke Sarah's professional restraint. Throughout her military career, she had endured countless instances of casual sexism and deliberate disrespect, usually responding with patience and professionalism. But standing there in front of 267 elite operators who were watching to see how she would handle this public humiliation, something inside her snapped. Kneel before me, Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying a strange kind of calm that made everyone within hearing distance freeze. The words were so unexpected, so completely outside the normal range of military discourse, that Walsh actually stopped mid-rant and stared at her in confusion. What did you just say to me? Walsh demanded, his face flushing with rage and disbelief. The training ground fell into an eerie silence as Sarah's words hung in the desert air. Every conversation stopped, every movement ceased, and 267 elite Navy SEALs found themselves witnessing something none of them had ever seen before. A 5'4" woman challenging a decorated special operations officer with a command that defied every military protocol they knew. Walsh's face cycled through several shades of red as he processed what he thought he had heard. Are you out of your goddamn mind, Martinez? Did you just order me to kneel? Sarah's response was delivered with a calmness that seemed almost supernatural given the tension of the moment. I did. And you're going to do it because you know as well as everyone else here that I outperformed you today, and you can't handle the fact that everything you believe about women in combat just got proven wrong. The audacity of her statement rippled through the crowd of watching SEALs like a shockwave. Some stepped closer, unable to believe what they were witnessing. Others pulled out their phones, instinctively understanding that they were about to see something that would be talked about for years to come. Master Chief Thompson had been observing from a distance, but Sarah's words carried clearly enough for him to hear everything. Instead of intervening immediately, he made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He wanted to see how this would play out. "You've lost your mind," Walsh said, but his voice carried less certainty than his words suggested. "I'm not kneeling to anybody, least of all some wannabe operator who got lucky on an obstacle course." Sarah took a step closer to Walsh, and despite their significant difference in size, something about her presence made him unconsciously step backward. "Let's talk about luck, Lieutenant Commander. Was it luck when I spotted the booby trap that you missed? Was it luck when I shot a perfect score under stress conditions while you managed 3 out of 5? Was it luck when I identified the hostage location before you even processed the tactical situation?" Each question was delivered like a precision strike, and Walsh found himself without effective answers. Around them, the circle of watching SEALs was growing larger as word spread that something unprecedented was happening. Tank Rodriguez had positioned himself where he could intervene if the confrontation turned physical, but he found himself genuinely curious about how Sarah planned to back up her extraordinary challenge. Ghost Patterson was openly grinning, clearly enjoying watching Walsh's discomfort. "Performance metrics don't mean anything," Walsh said, but his argument was weakening. "This isn't about one training exercise. This is about whether you can function in a real unit when everything goes to hell." "Then, let's test that," Sarah said, her voice carrying across the training ground with startling clarity. "Right here, right now, in front of everyone. You pick the challenge. Any physical test, any tactical scenario, any measure of competence you want. If I fail, I'll apologize to you and every operator here for wasting their time." The crowd stirred with anticipation. This was no longer just a personal conflict between two people. It had become a test case for everything these men believed about capability, gender, and military excellence. Walsh found himself trapped by his own rhetoric. He had spent the entire day questioning Sarah's abilities and suggesting that her performance was inadequate. Now she was offering him the chance to prove his point definitively, in front of the entire group, with conditions that heavily favored him. "And if you lose?" Walsh asked, though he was clearly struggling to imagine that possibility. Sarah's answer was delivered with complete confidence. "Then you kneel before me and acknowledge that I earned my place here through merit, not politics." The stakes were now crystal clear, and the tension was so thick it felt like a physical presence. Master Chief Thompson realized that he was witnessing something that transcended normal military training. This had become a defining moment that would either validate years of progress in military gender integration or set it back significantly. "Choose your challenge," Sarah said simply. Walsh looked around at the faces surrounding him, seeing expressions that ranged from eager anticipation to genuine concern. He was an experienced officer who understood crowd dynamics, and he could sense that the mood was shifting in ways that weren't favorable to him. Several SEALs who had been neutral or even supportive of his position were now looking at him with expectation, waiting to see if he could back up his claims. "Hand-to-hand combat," Walsh said finally. 3 minutes, submission or knockout wins. No weapons. It was a logical choice from his perspective. He outweighed Sarah by at least 70 pounds and had significant reach advantages. More importantly, hand-to-hand combat was often seen as the most fundamental test of warrior capability, stripping away technology and technique to reveal pure fighting ability. But Walsh had made his choice without knowing about Sarah's background in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and mixed martial arts, training that had begun during her teenage years, and continued throughout her military career. While the SEALs knew about her marksmanship and tactical skills, her martial arts expertise had never come up during previous conversations. Master Chief Thompson stepped forward to establish rules and ensure safety, but his presence also legitimized what was happening. By officiating rather than stopping the confrontation, he was sending a signal that this challenge fell within acceptable boundaries of military training. The circle of SEALs formed a natural fighting area, with everyone maintaining enough distance to allow movement while still being close enough to see every detail. Several operators pulled out phones to record what they instinctively knew would be a historic moment. As Walsh and Sarah faced each other in the center of the circle, the size difference was dramatic and obvious. Walsh looked confident, even relaxed, as he prepared for what he clearly expected to be a brief demonstration of physical superiority. Sarah appeared calm, but focused, her stance revealing training that most of the watching SEALs didn't recognize. "Ready?" Master Chief Thompson asked, looking at both participants. Both nodded. "Begin." Walsh moved forward aggressively, intending to use his size advantage to overwhelm Sarah quickly. It was a reasonable strategy against most opponents, but it revealed his fundamental misunderstanding of what he was facing. Sarah slipped his initial charge with fluid grace, using his momentum against him in a way that left him momentarily off balance. Before he could recover, she had moved inside his reach and was controlling his center of gravity with grips that felt impossibly strong for someone her size. The watching SEALs suddenly realized that they weren't seeing a mismatch. They were watching a grappling specialist work against someone who was primarily trained in striking arts. Walsh's size and strength were real advantages, but Sarah's technical skill was immediately evident to anyone who understood ground fighting. Within 30 seconds, Walsh found himself in a position he had never experienced before, being systematically controlled and positioned by someone half his size. Every attempt to use his strength was neutralized by technique, leverage, and timing that seemed almost supernatural. At the 1-minute mark, Sarah had maneuvered Walsh into a compromising position where his own weight and momentum were working against him. The crowd watched in stunned silence as she applied a chokehold with such technical precision that resistance only made it more effective. Walsh struggled frantically, his face reddening as he realized that his strength was useless against properly applied technique. The psychological impact was as devastating as the physical submission. In front of every SEAL he had served with, he was being completely outclassed by the woman he had spent the day dismissing. At 90 seconds, Walsh tapped out. The silence that followed was absolute. Nobody moved, nobody spoke, nobody seemed to breathe as the implications of what they had just witnessed settled over the group. Sarah released the hold immediately and helped Walsh to his feet with professional courtesy. "Good match, sir," she said simply. Walsh stood there, his face showing the kind of shock that comes from having fundamental beliefs shattered in under 2 minutes. Around him, 267 elite operators were processing the fact that they had just watched a masterclass in combat technique delivered by someone they had been systematically underestimating. Master Chief Thompson stepped forward, his weathered face showing something that might have been a slight smile. "Well, Lieutenant Commander," he said quietly, "I believe you have something to do." The moment stretched out like an eternity as Walsh struggled with the reality of his situation. Every eye was on him, every phone was recording, and every person present understood that this moment would define his character and integrity for the rest of his career. Slowly, with the weight of absolute defeat settling on his shoulders, Lieutenant Commander Derek Walsh lowered himself to one knee before Sarah Martinez. The sound of 267 Navy SEALs spontaneously applauding filled the desert air, a thunderous recognition of courage, skill, and the kind of warrior excellence that transcended every boundary they had previously accepted. Sarah had not just won a fight. She had changed everything the scorching sun beat down mercilessly on the Navy training facility in Coronado, California. Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her brow as she adjusted her tactical gear one final time. At 24 years old, she stood barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, but her eyes burned with a determination that had carried her through 2 years of grueling preparation for this moment. The obstacle course stretched out before her like a metal and concrete beast designed to break spirits and shatter dreams. For the past 6 months, Sarah had been the only woman among 267 elite Navy SEALs participating in an experimental cross-training program. The military brass wanted to test new combat techniques, and Sarah, a former Marine turned private contractor, had somehow earned her spot through a series of qualifying tests that had eliminated hundreds of other candidates. The men around her weren't just any soldiers. These were the cream of the crop, warriors who had survived Hell Week, completed countless missions in hostile territories, and earned their place among the most feared special operations forces in the world. Each one of them had initially viewed Sarah's presence as either a publicity stunt or a social experiment doomed to fail. Master Chief Petty Officer Jake "Razor" Thompson stood at the edge of the course, his weathered face showing no emotion as he watched the participants prepare. At 42, he had seen more combat than most people could imagine, and he had trained thousands of SEALs over his 20-year career. When he first heard that a woman would be joining their elite group for this exercise, he had simply shrugged. Results spoke louder than gender in his world. The whispers started early that morning as Sarah checked her equipment. Some of the SEALs exchanged glances and made quiet comments about whether she would make it past the first obstacle. Others remained silent, adopting a wait-and-see attitude. A few, however, seemed to take her presence as a personal insult to their brotherhood. Lieutenant Commander Derek Walsh was the most vocal of Sarah's critics. A decorated SEAL with multiple deployments under his belt, he had made no secret of his belief that women had no place in special operations. During the morning briefing, he had deliberately spoken over Sarah when she asked a technical question about the course layout. His attitude had infected a small group of his followers, creating an undercurrent of hostility that Sarah could feel like electricity in the air. As the participants lined up at the starting position, Sarah found herself positioned between two massive SEALs who towered over her by more than a foot. The man to her left, Petty Officer First Class Mike Tank Rodriguez, gave her a slight nod of acknowledgement. He had served alongside female Marines in Afghanistan and had learned to respect anyone who earned their way into combat, regardless of gender. The man to her right, however, remained stone-faced and avoided eye contact entirely. The course itself was a nightmare of physical and mental challenges designed to push even elite operators to their breaking point. It began with a 100-yard low crawl under razor wire, followed by a series of rope climbs, wall scaling, tire flips, and precision shooting stations. The final obstacle was a simulation of urban combat, requiring participants to navigate through a mock building while engaging targets and rescuing a hostage mannequin. What made this particular exercise unique was its competitive nature. Unlike traditional training, where everyone worked toward completion, this course ranked participants based on overall time and accuracy. The results would be used to evaluate new training methods and potentially influence future SEAL selection criteria. For Sarah, it represented something much more personal, a chance to prove that her 2 years of preparation and sacrifice had been worth it. Master Chief Thompson raised his hand to signal the start. The desert wind picked up slightly, carrying with it the smell of dust and diesel fuel from nearby vehicles. Sarah felt her heart rate slow as she entered the zone of focused calm that had served her well during her Marine deployments in Iraq. She had learned long ago that physical strength alone wouldn't carry her through challenges like this. Mental toughness, tactical intelligence, and the ability to push through pain when others quit would be her greatest weapons. The countdown began, and Sarah noticed several of the SEALs stealing glances at her. Some looked curious, others skeptical, and a few appeared openly hostile. She had faced similar attitudes throughout her military career, but never in such a concentrated environment where failure would be witnessed by so many elite operators. The weight of representation pressed down on her shoulders. She wasn't just competing for herself. She was competing for every woman who might follow in her footsteps. As Master Chief Thompson's hand dropped, and the word "go" echoed across the training ground, Sarah exploded forward with the rest of the group. The low crawl under razor wire was brutal, with rocks and sand grinding against her uniform as she pulled herself forward with her elbows and knees. Her smaller stature actually worked to her advantage here, allowing her to stay lower than the larger men around her. But this was just the beginning, and Sarah knew that the real test would come when fatigue set in and the obstacles grew more demanding.